My name is Elmer, and before continuing, let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever trusted someone to the point of handing over the key to your house, and suddenly realized that this person was just waiting for the right time to take it away from you? Well, that's exactly what happened to me, and to this day I wonder in what second, in what gesture, in what smile I should have noticed. I know that many people who listen to me now have gone through this strange feeling, that impression that there is something out of place, but we don't want to believe it. We try to be fair, we try to see the best in people. We try not to see evil where there should be family. I was like that too, an old man but not bitter. I just wanted peace within the walls I built with my own hands, there in Naperville. But after my daughter's wedding, something has changed, and it changed too quickly. In this video, I'll tell you how a polite smile became a threat, how my own living room became a stranger's territory, and how within days my son-in-law showed up at my door with a notary, saying that my house was no longer mine. By the end of this story, you'll understand how I discovered the truth and what I did when it all unfolded before me. And believe me, none of this was by chance. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. Because what happened 2 days after my daughter's wedding still echoes inside me as if it happened yesterday. I remember opening the door and seeing Andrew standing on my porch, too lined up, too confident, and next to him, a notary holding a briefcase as if carrying a sentence. They told me, with the calm of someone who has already decided everything, that my house was sold and that I would be taken to an institution for the elderly. It was at that moment that I felt something break inside me, and before the blow closed, I could only answer, "Let's first go to the police station. They will like what I reported about you. But for me to have the courage to reopen this wound before you, I need your support. So if you can, leave your like and subscribe while listening to me." It's not by numbers. It's because telling something like this hurts, and knowing that there are people on the other side walking with me makes this memory a little less heavy. I really thank you. I remember that dinner as someone who stares at a photograph yellowed by time, still, silent, but still too hot to play without feeling pain. We had just celebrated my daughter's wedding in downtown Chicago. I was tired, but happy. Do you know that feeling of accomplishment? We give the arm, the money, the time, the last years of strength, and when she sees her daughter smiling in a white dress, it seems that it was all worth it. That's how I felt when we sat down at Golden Oaks, an elegant restaurant that Lindsay had always wanted to visit. The lights were low, jazz music filled every corner, and I just wanted to relax, eat my piece of cake, and silently thank Martha for giving me that girl. But it was there, among the smell of wine and polished wood, that the first alarm rang inside me. Andrew was sitting in front of me. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect posture. Lindsay, beaming, didn't notice. And I, maybe because I'm old, maybe because I've lived a lot, I realized the excess. Perfect smiles are rarely real. He held the cup like someone holding a chess piece. His every gesture seemed calculated, polished to the point of losing its heat. When the waiter picked up the plates, he leaned forward and said, with a softness that pierced me like ice down my spine, "Elmer, your home would be perfect for a young couple to start a family." It took a few seconds for me to breathe again. The phrase came wrapped in kindness, but it sounded like a push. I remember looking at the wedding cake on my plate, still sweet, and feel the taste change to bitter. I made an effort to keep my voice steady when I answered, "Andrew, this is my home." He did not back down. The smile remained there, but the words became sharper. "It's too big for you, and keep it all. It must be heavy. Think ahead. Think of the grandchildren who will run down those aisles." Grandchildren. He used my grandchildren, who didn't even exist yet, to justify his interest in my house. His hand rested on Lindsay's as an actor who knows the script well. She, poor thing, looked from one to the other, unaware that something bigger was happening beneath the surface. I felt my chest tighten, not for the request, but for his boldness. I was there 2 days after paying $15,000 for their wedding reception, and I could already hear my home being treated as an available asset. It was at that moment that sadness touched me more strongly than anger, because sitting there, I began to wonder if I had let someone in too much, too soon. And when life teaches this to an old man, it teaches it in the cruelest way. And before continuing, let me open my heart to you who are listening to me now. There are times when we realize that the world has changed, but we haven't changed together. Moments when something inside us says there's something wrong, but no one will believe me. If you've ever felt that. He comments there with a "it's true" or "I've lived it." Sometimes a simple phrase shows that we are not as alone as we think. I took a deep breath, trying not to tremble. The atmosphere became suffocating. Jazz, which once seemed elegant, began to look debaucherous. I saw couples smiling at other tables, lit by candles, while my world, mine, it started to move to a place where I didn't want to go. Lindsay tried to soften it. "Dad, please, don't fight. It's supposed to be a happy night." And that hurt, because it wasn't her talking. It was the context, the pressure, the moment. She just wanted peace, as I always wanted. I put the napkin on the table, took a deep breath, and spoke in the only way I had left. "Andrew, you can stay a few days at my house, but the house is mine, and it continues to be." His smile cracked for a moment, just 1 second, but I saw it. I saw the coldness in the depths of her eyes. I saw the broken calculus. I saw the plan scratched. And any old man who has lived long enough knows how to recognize when someone didn't like to hear a no. I stood up. The throat burned. I left money on the table and excused myself. I didn't trust my voice to say anything else. I just wanted to get out of there before the pain overflowed. When I stepped out into the cold March air, my breath escaping in steam, I knew, even without fully understanding, that night was over, but the story hadn't even begun. And the worst thing is that, when I got home that same day, I still had no idea of the gravity of what was to come. Because dinner was just the first crack. The second, it was about to emerge in a way I could never have imagined. Do you want to know when I really realized that something terrible was afoot? Do you want to know what was the first sign that it wasn't just ambition, but a plan? So follow along with me, because the next part is the moment when everything started to really fall apart. When I got home that night, still with the smell of the restaurant stuck in my jacket and Andrew's voice hammering in the back of my head, I tried to convince myself that maybe I had overreacted. Old people do that sometimes. Try to find an explanation for what hurts. Try to give a discount. Try to think that the world has changed and that we are the ones who have been stuck in time. But as I went up the stairs, taking off my coat slowly, as if trying to delay my own restlessness, I felt that something in me could no longer return to the state it had before. The next day, Lindsay and Andrew came to my house under the pretext of bringing some gifts they had received at the wedding. I had slept badly, but I smiled anyway. An old man does that too. He smiles so as not to worry. But Andrew arrived, talking faster, more confidently, as if he already knew exactly what he was going to say. "Elmer," he began, with that trained tone of someone who confuses education with superiority, "I was thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I think you should reflect more carefully on the change. I was in the kitchen making coffee, and I didn't even turn right away. I just heard. The noise of the hot liquid falling into the strainer was the only sound between us for a few seconds. The house is too big for you to manage yourself," he continued, "and there are the costs. The neighborhood valued it too much. It's a waste for someone your age to carry that burden." My age. I can't explain it, but whenever someone uses this expression to belittle us, no matter how kind the phrase seems, it comes with a bitter taste. I took a deep breath, turned around, and looked at Lindsay before looking at him. She looked uncomfortable, as if she was caught between love and loyalty. He lowered his eyes, moved his fingers, avoided positioning himself. And I didn't blame my daughter. She was in love, newly married, trying to build a life with that man. But Andrew? Andrew wasn't a newlywed trying to start a family. He was a man testing limits. So I kept my voice calm when answering. Andrew, I've thought about it enough. The house is mine. I stay in it. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of someone who respects. It was the kind of smile we see in insistent salespeople, those who don't accept a no because they know they still have cards up their sleeves. Sure, he said, raising his hands theatrically, but Lindsay and I are looking at apartments. Nothing too big because, well, rent in Chicago is impossible. The words fell like small baits on the table. He tried to make me feel sorry. He tried to make me carry a weight that was not mine. I reached out, turned off the coffee fire and said, still serene, "You're both young. You can find a way." His smile faded 0.5 millimeter, but I saw it. I saw the mask tremble. I saw a gleam of irritation cross his gaze, fast as lightning, and when the mask cracks a little bit, we finally know the truth that was hidden behind. He walked slowly into the living room, pretending to observe the decor. "It's a wonderful house, Elmer. A lot of history, a lot of value." The pause he took after Valor was not accidental. Lindsay tried to bring up another subject, but he was decided. He walked to the window, looking at my backyard as if he were evaluating footage. I felt my stomach turn. For the first time, the twinge of fear appeared, not physical fear. Fear of realizing that this man, whom I had received with goodwill, had begun to see me as an obstacle. And when someone sees an obstacle, it's not affection that comes later. "You know," he added, still with false lightness, "it's really a shame that a house like this is occupied by one person. And, good, you have worked so hard in your life. Maybe it's time to rest." That sentence, said like this with a friendly smile, sounded like a verdict to me, as if he had already decided my fate. He just needed me to agree. But I didn't agree. Not that day. Not ever. "Andrew," I said, approaching him, "don't talk like I had one foot in the grave. I'm alive, and in full possession of my wits." He didn't like it, and he didn't make a point of hiding it. The corner of his mouth trembled, his breathing changed, his eyes hardened. "I'm just thinking about the good of everyone," he replied, too dry to be honest. In that instant, I finally realized something I should have realized before. Andrew wasn't offering help. I was testing dominance. He was probing ground. And when I denied, he started using Lindsay. "Love," he said, turning to her. "You yourself said you care about your father alone in this huge house." She awkwardly nodded. "I worry, but—" I interrupted. "Lindsay, my daughter, I'm fine. I always have been," Andrew countered before she could even breathe. "But for how long?" That's when I felt the first fissure open up inside me. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, sadder. It was the feeling of realizing that at that very moment, my house was no longer mine alone in his eyes, and became a prize, and awards. Prizes make bad men hurry, and I swear. In that room, while he was talking about my house as if talking about an investment, I felt that it was not going to end there, and I was right, because what happened the next day, it was the first sign that danger was already inside my door. Do you want to know what I discovered? Do you want to know what was the detail that turned my fear into certainty? So stay with me, because what comes next is not easy to tell. I spent that whole night walking around the house like someone walking through a battlefield after combat. Every corner had a meaning. Every piece of furniture had a story. Every photograph was silent proof that that house wasn't just an address. It was the last living part of me. But after that conversation with Andrew, something inside me started to turn. It was as if all the words he had said in the past few months were coming back to the surface, one by one, revealing a pattern I refused to see at the time. I sat in the living room, in the armchair where Martha used to embroider, and let my memory work. I first remembered the spring barbecue, months before the wedding, when Andrew asked me, too loosely to be disinterested, how much I paid in annual property tax. I answered in innocence, thinking it was curiosity, and he, smiling, commented that a house of that size should be reorganized to generate profit. That day, I found only modern talk from people who think too much about investment. Then came the memory of when he asked how many years were left for me to really retire, as if retirement had a degree. And at a casual dinner party, he wanted to know how much the house had appreciated since Martha and I bought it. He said it was admirable that I hadn't sold while prices were rising. Admirable. Now, looking back, I realized that that word was loaded with something I hadn't understood. Then I started to remember the little things that had gone unnoticed. Like when he praised the fact that I had the original deed kept and asked where exactly it was kept, just out of curiosity. Or when he told Lindsay that too big a house doesn't go well with an elderly person alone. I was there, reconstructing dialogues that, added together, formed the skeleton of a plan that now seemed too obvious. With each memory I revisited, I felt as if a cold hand was squeezing my chest. It was no longer a nuisance. It was a warning. It was a premonition. And yet, as much as all the pieces began to fall into place, a part of me insisted on doubting. We do this when the danger has a familiar face, when it comes disguised as family. We try to think that we are exaggerating, that we are old, that we are too suspicious of the world. I found myself repeating to myself, Elmer, maybe that's paranoia. But the truth is, when the heart has understood, the mind only delays the pain. I went to the office, opened the drawer where I keep old documents, and found a folder with bills and receipts from the last few years. I sat on the floor and started to compare dates, values, moments. It was like putting together a puzzle that I didn't want to finish. With each new piece that fits, Andrew's face became clearer. And it wasn't a son-in-law's face. It was the face of someone who was studying me, observing my habits, measuring my routines, assessing my vulnerabilities. I ran my hands over my face, tired. The clock was almost 3 a.m, and in a moment of pure silence, there in the middle of the papers, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Real fear. Not afraid of losing the house, but fear of discovering that I had put my daughter in the hands of a man who had no soul. I got up slowly, my back protesting, and went to the hallway. I looked at the pictures pinned to the wall, Lindsay as a child, Martha hugging us both, the day I built the new porch, and suddenly those memories that had always warmed my chest began to feel fragile as glass. Because all that was at risk. Everything. It was in that silence that I realized it wasn't just about me, it was about my whole story, my family, my memory, my dignity. And when I understood that, I also understood that the conversation I had with Andrew had not been the height of the problem. It had been just the beginning, because the next day something happened. Something that left no room for doubt, nor for hope that it was paranoia. Something that would confirm, once and for all, that I was dealing with someone dangerous, and that I needed to open my eyes before it was too late. And that's what you'll see in the next part. Because what I discovered was not just a detail, it was the proof. And a test like this changes everything. I woke up that morning still with a heavy head, as if the whole night had been trapped inside me. I made stronger coffee than usual, trying to clear my thoughts, but with each sip, I could only remember Andrew's old questions, the expressions that once seemed like curiosity, and now they revealed something much darker. I was sitting on the porch, staring at the backyard still damp from frost, when I heard slow footsteps coming through the side gate. It was Carl Thompson, my neighbor, for over 30 years. Former policeman, war veteran, one of those men who carry in their eyes a mixture of firmness and kindness that only time teaches. He never showed up early like that. At that moment, my intuition, which hasn't failed since I lost Martha, lit up like a beacon. Carl approached slowly, took off his cap, and put his hand on my shoulder with a care that only those who have a lot of respect for us know how to have. "Elmer," We need to talk. Just hearing the tone of his voice froze my back. I invited him in, but he preferred to stay on the porch, looking around as if he needed to make sure no one was around. This made me even more uncomfortable. I should have spoken yesterday, he began, but you looked tired, so I decided to wait until today. He took a deep breath as if preparing to drop a bomb. Elmer, while you were at the wedding party, there were people entering your house. My body froze. I felt the cup get too hot in my hand, almost slipping. Who? I asked, although deep down I already knew the answer. Carl stepped closer, locked his gaze on mine, and said bluntly, "Your son-in-law." And he was not alone. He explained that he saw Andrew entering through the side door with a man in a black briefcase, formal clothes, an evaluative look. They had no expression of those who visit family. They had the attitude of those who evaluate assets. Carl described the man accurately. He was clearly a real estate appraiser, and then he added, "They stayed inside for almost an hour." I felt my heart beat so hard that the sound echoed in my ears. The house, my last piece of life with Martha. It had been used as an inspection ground for someone who didn't even ask for permission. The walls that kept a child's birthday, the windows that I installed myself, the floor that I closed with my hands. Everything had been seen as a product, as a commodity, like something that could be taken away from me. I closed my eyes, and in that instant, for the first time since marriage, I dropped my entire penny. Andrew wasn't probing, he was preparing the ground. And my refusal at dinner had only delayed the plan, not hindered it. Carl kept talking, but for a few seconds I didn't even hear it. It was as if the world had become distant, muffled, while I tried in silence to understand the size of that betrayal. When I finally managed to pay attention again, he said, "Elmer, friend, sorry to bring it to you like this, but I know you, and I know when you're in danger." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Did he handle my things?" I asked in a firmer voice than I expected. Carl hesitated, and that small gesture was enough to break me inside. "I didn't see them taking anything, but Elmer, they opened doors, they turned on lights, they walked around the house as if they had the right." I put my hand to my mouth, trying to swallow the bitter that rose up my throat, because it wasn't just an invasion of space, it was an invasion of dignity. It was the confirmation that I wasn't imagining anything, that the danger was not psychological nor exaggeration. It was real, concrete, inside my house. And look, before continuing, let me take this moment to talk to you who are listening to me. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening to me, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not by number, no. It's because reliving it moves us, and when I see support there on the other side, it seems that the pain weighs a little less. Thank you. Carl asked me if I wanted him to call someone, but I just asked him to tell me everything he remembered, even the smallest details. He said Andrew's car was parked 2 blocks down, as if he didn't want to be seen too close. The evaluator entered with a clipboard, took discreet photos on his cell phone. Andrew pointed to the kitchen, the backyard, the second floor. "They were assessing market value," Carl said, and then he added, almost whispering, "Elmer, it was a coup, and it's going to get worse. The feeling of being deceived, to be used, it's hard to describe. It's as if someone has ripped confidence out of your hands while you're still trying to believe that everything is fine." And looking at the house at that moment, every detail seemed to carry the weight of the violation. I leaned against the balcony railing, looked at the street, and felt a silent rage rise inside me. Not the impulsive anger that makes young people speak loudly. It was a deep, quiet, lucid anger. The anger of those who understood that they need to prepare, of those who understood that they can no longer be innocent. Carl put his hand on my arm and said, "You need to be careful, Elmer. This is not over yet." And I knew with every fiber of my body that he was right. Because Andrew wouldn't have called an appraiser if he was just curious. He was already advancing. He was already predicting his victory. I was already counting on my weakness. And I was the only one who had not yet taken a stand. I spent the rest of the morning pacing back and forth inside the house, trying to understand where exactly he had stepped, where he had touched, what he had seen. Each room looked different now, as if the invasion had left an invisible shadow on the walls. And it was in this state of alert that I remembered a detail, something I had completely ignored, but which now seemed like an important piece of the puzzle. Something Andrew had said weeks before, in such a casual tone that at the time I didn't even care. And this detail, as small as it is dangerous, would be the thread that would pull the whole truth together. Do you want to know what that detail was? Want to know what Andrew blurted out without realizing it, and that ended up showing me that his plan was already much more advanced than I imagined? So stay with me, because that's exactly what comes in the next part. I spent the rest of that day trying to get my thoughts in order, but each memory seemed to pull another, as if a skein of distrust was finally unraveling inside me. And it was in the midst of this silent confusion that a detail came back to my head with force. Weeks earlier, Andrew had used my computer to print a receipt, according to him. That day, I was in the backyard, trimming some plants, and when I returned, he closed the screen too quickly, as if hiding something he shouldn't be seeing. I ignored it at the time. Old people have a habit of trusting, but now, after what Carl told me, that scene has taken on another meaning. So I went to the office, turned on the computer, and opened the browser history. It had been a while since I touched it, but my hands knew exactly where to click, as if my whole life was preparing me for that moment. The first page opened was innocent, a tool shopping site. The second didn't say much either, but in the third, my stomach turned. A search for real estate appraisers in Naperville, just as Carl had described. I continued down the list, and then came the deepest scam. Pages explaining how the transfer of property to family members works, with and without the owner's consent. Further down, articles on mental competence of the elderly and interdiction proceedings in Illinois. And as if that were not enough, a video teaching how to prepare a preliminary sales document using ready-made notary templates. My hands turned cold. My throat dried up. I ran my fingers slowly across the screen, as if touching the words was less painful than reading them. Andrew had researched everything. Each step, every possibility, every loophole that someone like me, a lonely, grieving man with a newly married adult daughter, could present. That's when I realized that it wasn't improvised. He was methodical, calculating. He had studied my weak point before I even realized I was exposed. I closed my eyes for a few seconds and felt a wave of anger rise inside me, but not an explosive rage. It was a quiet, concentrated anger that burned like embers over low heat. The anger of those who were calmly deceived. The anger of those who were analyzed as objects. The anger of those who realized that the smile they received for months was actually a curtain for a plan built on my back. I rested my arms on the table and stood there, breathing slowly, trying not to let the emotion overwhelm me. At these times, we learn that the worst betrayal is not the one who screams. It is the one that whispers. It is the one that disguises itself as affection. And I was hearing the entire whisper now. I continued down the history. I found searches for how much is a 3-bedroom house in Naperville worth, how to challenge seniors' decisions, and even an infamous article about how to convince resistant family members to make necessary changes. I felt the weight of the sentence. He was studying me. He was putting together arguments. I was preparing justifications for when I finally surrounded myself, and he would have surrounded if I hadn't seen all that at that moment. I closed the notebook slowly. The click of the clasp felt like a shot inside the silent room. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling, trying to understand at what point in my life I allowed a stranger to enter so deep into my home, my habits, my heart. The answer was simple. I allowed it because it came through the path where we are weaker. He came for my daughter. And then, as if life was throwing me another shadow to process, I remembered something Andrew had said at dinner a few weeks earlier. He commented that he had already dealt with complicated family properties when he lived in Arizona. At the time, it seemed like table talk. But now, with all the searches open before me, that sentence took on another tone. That was not a comment. It was a masked confession. Slowly I sat on the edge of the bed. I felt a weight that seemed greater than age, a weight that only those who discover a slow betrayal understand. I wanted to cry, but I didn't cry. Old people don't cry easily. We fold inside first, and there, bent over, silent, I began to realize that what Andrew was doing wasn't just a plan. It was a process, planned, studied, preparation. And that I had just gotten my hands on the clearest proof of that. But there was still one piece missing. Something was still missing that would confirm everything definitively. And this piece was about to appear in the place where I least expected it. Because that night, while I was calmly reviewing everything, I found not only searches, but something even more serious. Something that showed that Andrew wasn't just probing my life. He was about to take a step that could destroy me completely. Do you want to know what I found? Do you want to know what was the detail that made my blood run cold, and that proved that I had much less time than I imagined? Then follow me, because what comes in the next part will completely change the course of the story. I stood there, sitting in my office, with the computer closed, and my heart beating in a strange rhythm, as if each pulse was trying to warn me something that I still didn't have the courage to face. It was then that my eyes fell on the diary that was in the second drawer, that same leather-bound notebook that Martha gave me on our 40-year wedding anniversary. For you to keep the important things, Elmer. Those that don't just fit in the head. She said it smiling, and I always thought it was funny because I was never much of a writer. But after she left, that diary became almost an extension of my own memory. Each page carried a piece of my life, as if writing was the only way to keep Martha close to me. I picked up the diary with both hands, feeling the old, soft leather around the edges from so much use. I sat in the armchair next to the window, where the late afternoon light was always milder, and opened to the first blank page I found. The silence of the house weighed more than ever, a silence that seemed to ask me if I really wanted to record what was happening, but it was either that or allowing everything to become a blur inside the head. And I couldn't afford that. Not now. I wrote slowly at the top of the page, April 7th. Something is wrong. I stopped for a moment and took a deep breath. My hand trembled a little, not because of my age, but because of the certainty that what I was putting on paper had the power to change my life. I used the same care I had when I wrote about missing Martha. Only this time the pain was different. It wasn't nostalgia, it was fear, silent fear. Fear of being discarded, fear of being right about Andrew. I wrote down everything I had seen in the computer's history, the evaluators, the processes for the elderly, research on navigating the Illinois law, the pages about convincing resistant family members. Each line seemed more absurd than the last, but the more I wrote, the more real everything became. It is curious how putting it on paper transforms suspicion into truth, and as I filled the pages, a bad feeling spread through my chest. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper. It was the feeling, almost childish, that I was no longer seen as a human being, but as an obstacle, an object, a property with legs. I closed the diary for a moment and leaned my head against the back of the armchair. And it was there, looking at the ceiling, that a sentence escaped my mouth without me planning it. It's strange how we spend our whole lives building a home, and one day someone tries to tear it out, as if it were just wood and brick. That phrase kept echoing inside me. Because that was it. They weren't trying to take my house. They were trying to take my story, and you who are listening to me now, I know that you may have been in a situation where what you were, the value of your life, seemed less than what you had. And please stay with me until the end of this story, because this is it, right here, that everything really started to change. I opened the diary again and wrote a few more pages, also recording the strange phrases Andrew had said over the months. Things that at the time seemed like loose comments, but now, seen together, revealed an intention that I had not been able to see before. Have you ever thought about what you're going to do with all this space when you get older? These old houses are great investment opportunities. The neighborhood is valuing too much to be stagnant. Even the way he observes my habits, my schedules, my routines, I had confused vigilance with care. And that conclusion hurt. It hurt more than I expected. I kept writing until the daylight disappeared completely. When I closed the diary, the feeling was that I had taken a weight off my chest, but placed another on his lap. Because now, with everything on record, the question I feared most came up with force. What else had Andrew done without me knowing? And this question, my friend, this question began to hammer in my head as if it were a warning, a premonition, because the answer was much closer than I imagined. And when it arrived, I found out that the biggest blow was yet to come. Want to know what it was? Then come with me for the next part, because that's where the truth finally knocks on the door. And it doesn't knock on its own. When I turned off the journal that night, I thought the worst was over. But deep down, something told me that I was just scratching the surface. I slept badly, waking up with every noise in the house, as if any step in the hallway could be Andrew coming back with another surprise. The next day, still early, I took courage and did something I had been avoiding for years. I picked up the phone to call Edward Lawson, my longtime lawyer, a serious, straightforward man, one of those who don't talk more than necessary. He'd taken care of all the paperwork when Martha passed away, and he was the one who helped me reorganize my finances after she left. I knew that if anyone could guide me, it was him. I dialed the number slowly, as if fearing what he will hear. Lawson & Pierce Law Firm, good morning. The voice answering was that of the secretary, Sandra. Sandra, it's Elmer. I need to talk to Edward. It is urgent. There was a quick pause, one of those that denounce concern. One moment, Mr. Elmer. And less than a minute later, I heard Edward's deep voice. Elmer, Sandra said it's urgent. Did something happen? I took a deep breath, trying to organize everything I needed to tell. Edward, I think my son-in-law is trying to take my house. There was silence. Heavy silence, as if he were choosing his words carefully. Explain. I told you everything. Dinner, the veiled pressure, the evaluator's visit, the computer's history, strange behavior, every detail. I could only hear breathing on the other side. When I finished, Edward didn't say, "That's absurd," or "You're exaggerating," or "It must be a misunderstanding." He said only, "Elmer, I need you to sit down." My whole body froze. Why? More silence. Then the line that made my stomach turn. I've heard the name Andrew Collins before. I felt a stab in the back of my head. What do you mean? Elmer, don't hang up. I'm going to check out my files. Give me 2 minutes. He put it on mute, but to me it seemed like 20 minutes. I walked around the office like a trapped animal. When the call came back, his voice had a different weight. Almost a regret. Elmer, found. 3 cases. 3. 3 what? My voice came out almost breathless. 3 families, all with a similar pattern, and in all of them, the son-in-law, or fiancé in one case, presented himself as a financial advisor. Polite, helpful, and all the victims were men over 60 years old. I sat down slowly, as if my body had become too heavy. The lawyer continued. In 2 cases, he was able to partially transfer the property before disappearing with the money. In the 3rd, the process is in legal dispute. The name used was similar, but not the same. Andrew Collins, Andrew Cole, Andrew Colling. Small variations. I closed my eyes. For a moment I felt as if someone had turned off the light inside me. My son-in-law, my daughter's husband, a professional scammer, a predator. And the target now was me. Edward, what do I do? My voice was hoarse. First, you don't sign anything. Second, he is not alone with him to discuss documents. Third, you're coming to my office early tomorrow. Bring your deed, bank statements, and everything else you mentioned. Let's act before he acts. I ran my hand over my face, trying to absorb it. But that's when a pain I didn't expect appeared. Not the pain of betrayal, but the pain for Lindsay, my girl, my only daughter. She was married to a criminal, a man who had a history of destroying families, and she had no idea. At this point, as I stared at the wall, with the photograph of Lindsay at age 4 holding her mother's hand, I felt such a sharp twinge in my chest that I had to stop the story within the story. And I say this to you who are listening to me now. There is no greater pain than realizing that someone you loved and welcomed can hurt your family. It's a pain that no age heals, because it touches the most intimate place of who we are. If you understand this feeling, even if for another situation, comment there with a "I know how it is" or "I understand you." Sometimes just knowing that we are not alone, the soul breathes a little better. When I resumed my voice, Edward was still waiting for my answer. "I'm going tomorrow, at 9. I'll be waiting for you, Elmer, and I'm sorry, really." After I turned it off, I sat for a long time without moving a muscle. It was as if the whole house was watching me, waiting for what my next move would be. I knew that, from then on, nothing would be the same. Because now, it wasn't just suspicion. It was a fact. My son-in-law had a criminal past. There was a method, there was a pattern, and it had a new target, me. But what I didn't know yet, nor could I imagine at the time, was that the most important test, the one that would put everything to lose for him and everything to gain for me, was hidden inside my own house. And I was about to meet her. Want to know what it was? So come with me for the next part, because the revelation that was to come would change everything. Everything. I had never felt as vulnerable as I did that morning. After the call with Edward, and with the certainty that Andrew was not just an opportunistic son-in-law, but a man who had already repeated the same pattern of fraud in other states, something inside me changed. Each shadow, each noise, seemed to carry intention. I walked around the house slowly, revisiting room by room, trying to find some clue that might give me the upper hand, some flaw that Andrew might have left behind. That's when I noticed something strange in the living room. A small, almost invisible lens hidden behind one of the frames that Martha brought back from her trip. My heart raced. The camera was small, discreet, professional, and I knew exactly what it was for. Someone was watching me. The feeling of invasion was like a silent punch in the chest. Every wall of the house, every hallway that once brought me memories of happiness and tranquility, now seemed to watch me back. Andrew had turned my own house into a spy stage. I sat in the armchair, staring at the small, cold object, trying to figure out if it was real or if my tired mind was making it up. But no, it was real. The camera was there, ready to record my every gesture, every word, every decision. I felt a wave of quiet despair. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the feeling that everything I built, everything Martha and I built together, could be taken from me effortlessly. And at that moment, something even more important occurred to me. Andrew's arrogance had been his fault. He thought he could fool me, that I wouldn't realize it, that my age would be an obstacle to reacting. But he underestimated the experience of a lifetime observing details, planning, solving problems. I held the camera, examined the small device, and realized that if I handled it the right way, I could turn the tide. The sense of fear began to mix with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had in my hands not only the confirmation that I was being watched, but the proof that Andrew was exposing himself. Every angle he chose, every detail of the installation was a record of himself, a record that could become the key to protecting my home and my family. I took a deep breath and thought of Martha. How would she have reacted to all this? She always said that calm and observation were worth more than haste and anger, and I needed to follow this advice, even with a heavy heart. I walked down the hallway, observing every shadow, every door, every corner, mentally calculating how to use the situation to my advantage. The house was no longer just a home. It was a fortress that needed to be defended, and now I had the advantage of silent knowledge. At the same time, I felt the weight of isolation. Lindsay still didn't know anything. Carl trusted my discretion. Edward was waiting for my decision. I was alone in charge of a game that Andrew believed he had started. But there, in that silent room, camera in hand, a determination began to take shape. I wouldn't react impulsively. Each step would be calculated. His every move could be recorded and used to ensure that justice was served. And it is exactly at this point that everything begins to change. Because when you realize that someone is trying to take from you what is yours, and you still have the strength and intelligence to act, it is not just about defending a home. It's about protecting your history, your memory, your dignity, and believe me, what was to come in the next part. It would be the point at which all the patience, all the observation, and all the experience that I have carried since my youth would be put to the test. Want to know how I turned this quiet desperation into a strategy? So stay with me, because what Andrew didn't know is that he was about to learn that underestimating a man who has lived so long is the biggest mistake he could make. That night was long. I sat down in the old armchair, the same one Martha used to read with me after dinner, and stood there alone, just watching the silent house. With every shadow, every creak of the floor, I remembered what Andrew had done, the history Edward had revealed to me, the little flaws he had explored in the last few weeks, but for the first time I realized something I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just a victim. I still had strength. I still had intelligence. I still knew how to plan, build, anticipate problems, skills that accompanied me throughout my life as an engineer. I took a deep breath and let my mind wander through Andrew's every step, every visit, every seemingly innocent sentence that now had a clear purpose. The silence that once carried pain, fear, and anguish has now begun to morph into something different. Silence of strategy. Every movement, every observation of his would now be analyzed, catalogued, transformed into evidence. I got up and began to mentally review everything. Dates, times, conversations, expressions, small gestures. I took the diary out of the drawer and began to write down every detail, every fragment that might seem trivial but was now vitally important. I recorded the day of the dinner, the words that touched Lindsay, Andrew's look as he walked through the rooms, even the way he scrutinized my finances and asked about taxes and investments, all taking shape and meaning. I realized that every fragment of memory, every detail I had previously ignored, was a piece of the puzzle. And as I mentally catalogued it, I felt a quiet strength growing inside me, a certainty that now the situation would no longer be led by Andrew. He had underestimated the old man. He thought that my age would make me frail, that my experience would be incapable of reacting. But now I was ready. Taking a deep breath, I realized that this moment was the turning point. There would be no hurry, no impulses. Each action would be calculated, precise, like every project I had ever executed throughout my life. Every detail recorded, every piece of evidence catalogued, gave me control. And as I wrote and mentally revised, I felt like I was building not just a defense, but a moral counteroffensive, a silent, meticulous plan made of patience and observation. And if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, can it help me carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel, it makes more difference than you think. That night ended with the certainty that I would not be passive, that Andrew's every step would have a planned response, that my silence would turn into strategy. But it was not yet time to confront him. First, I needed to organize everything, protect every document, every piece of evidence, every memory that could be used to expose his intentions. And looking at the house in silence, I realized that the next step would require more than strength and intelligence. It would require patience, precision, and the right time for justice to manifest itself. The question that accompanied me that morning and that still hovers is, did Andrew know that he underestimated the wrong old man, or did he still have no idea that I was ready to turn the tide? That's the answer you'll discover in the next part, when every piece of evidence, every minute, detail I've recorded will begin to reveal the true extent of his plan and my ability to react. Edward Lawson greeted me in his low-key office in downtown Naperville as if we were about to plan a military operation, and in a way, it was just that. That old building with a simple facade kept silent and air-conditioned rooms with shelves full of lawsuits and legal books, and there I felt that I was finally not alone. Edward started direct, cold and precise, as always. Elmer, Andrew Collins is not an isolated case. He has a history in Arizona, Colorado and Washington. Identical fraud pattern in all states. He approaches families with vulnerable elderly people, gains trust, inserts himself into homes, and prepares falsified documents with the help of accomplices. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb every word. Every detail he mentioned sounded like a blow to the stomach, but it also ignited something inside me, the certainty that I could act. Edward went on to point out mistakes Andrew had made in previous attempts, such as failures in documentation and exposure in public records that could be used to prove criminal intent. Throughout the conversation, I realized that Andrew's every move could be turned into evidence if it was done accurately. Then Edward introduced Detective Sarah McConnell, an expert in financial abuse against the elderly. She entered the room, her posture firm, her attentive and meticulous gaze. "Mr. Weaver, we're going to need full cooperation to catch Andrew in the act," she said, and I realized that here was someone who understood exactly what was at stake. We sat at a large wooden table, and together we began to detail each step of the plan, discreet monitoring, recording the conversations, preparing documents that could lead Andrew to expose his intentions without realizing it. I, who have always lived by projecting, calculating, and anticipating failures, felt a clarity that I had not felt for years. For the first time, the feeling of powerlessness gave way to control. I began to mentally write down every detail Andrew had given me, every opportunity he inadvertently created for me to have irrefutable proof. And there, in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, genuine hope. Hope that even in the face of a predator, I could still use my experience, my patience, and my wits to turn the tide. I took a deep breath, looking at Edward and Sarah, and said quietly to myself, "Now, silence will work for me, not against me. And you know, friend, when we realize that we still have the strength to fight, that fear can be transformed into a strategy, life seems to open a crack of light in the middle of what seemed like absolute darkness. Every piece of evidence, every detail of Andrew's behavior, every step he believed was safe, could now be used as evidence. I began to feel a quiet confidence, a renewed respect for myself, and for the fact that my life experience could still protect my home, my daughter, and my dignity. If you're listening to me and feeling that, even in moments of despair, it's possible to rediscover strength and clarity, stay with me, because what will come in the next part is the point where all the planning and observation will turn into concrete action, and you'll see how even the most calculating of predators can be surprised by those who don't give in. As Edward and Detective Sarah McConnell sorted out the final details of the plan, a new piece of information struck me like lightning. Andrew wasn't just using ordinary methods to try to trick me. He was using slightly doctored identities and fictitious companies to mask the fraudulent transfers. It was striking and at the same time terrifying to realize the sophistication of the man I had considered part of my family. Every document, every signature, every seal, all carefully manipulated to give the appearance of legality and yet harm me and, most devastatingly, put Lindsay at risk. My daughter's name appeared in internal records, as if she had participated in some of these maneuvers, without even knowing it. The sense of shock I felt at that moment was almost physical, as if the ground had opened up under my feet. I held up Martha's diary and felt a pang of anger and despair, but also a renewed determination. I would not allow my legacy to be destroyed, and I would not allow my daughter to be dragged into it without understanding what was happening. I stopped for a moment and took a deep breath, realizing how some memories and situations mark us forever. The feeling of protecting someone we love, of fighting against silent injustices, remains in the soul in a way that no age erases. And I wanted you, who are listening to me now, to reflect on your own memories. What moments left such a deep mark on you that it has never been erased? If you've been through something similar, or know someone who has experienced something like this, share it in the comments, leave your record, because sometimes talking about it gives us the strength to face even the biggest challenges. Returning to my plan, I realized that every detail Andrew had overlooked or underestimated was now in my hands. Edward carefully analyzed each signature, each document, highlighting patterns that only someone with experience in complex fraud could notice. Sarah, for her part, suggested surveillance strategies that would ensure that Andrew could not even suspect that his own behavior was being meticulously monitored. Each meeting, each conversation, each analysis made the conviction grow within me that I could turn the tables on me. The initial despair turned into strategic clarity. I was no longer alone. I had capable professionals by my side, but I still knew that the center of the whole movement would be my own attention and cunning. I needed to watch every step, predict every move, and turn every fraud attempt into concrete evidence. The feeling was curious, a mixture of relief and tension, as if he had taken a huge weight off his shoulders, but was ready to carry even more until the final victory. And in the middle of this preparation, I realized that Andrew's greatest vulnerability was precisely the trust he placed in the ignorance of others. He believed that my age would make me unable to react. He underestimated my life experience, my watchful eye, and the ability to plan accurately. I knew that his confidence would be the key to our victory, and there, sitting in that Naperville office, surrounded by papers, digital files, and strategies, I felt that the decisive moment was near. Every second counted, every decision had to be precise. The difference between failure and justice lay in my own ability to anticipate movements, to remain calm and attentive, to turn fear into action. And the most incredible thing of all is that I still felt something deep for my daughter. Lindsay didn't know anything yet, but now I had the means to protect her. It wasn't just my home that was at stake, it was her innocence, her reputation, and her peace of mind. And it gave me more energy than any anger I could feel. Because when it comes to protecting those we love, life gives us a focus that no difficulty can erase. Now what comes next will be the turning point. Because all the evidence, all the observations, and all the documents that Andrew believed he was using to deceive me are about to turn into something he could never anticipate. And you will discover how a seemingly ordinary man in his silent house can turn every attempt to deceive him into a perfect trap. The next part will reveal the first concrete action, the first step in my plan to expose Andrew and ensure that justice was served. And you won't believe how accurately it all started to fall into place. The question that remains now is, will Andrew realize what is about to happen, or will he be the first to be caught by surprise? I entered the kitchen slowly, as if I didn't want to announce my presence, but at the same time with all my attention focused on Andrew's every move. He was there, trying to look casual, fiddling with a cup of coffee like it was just another ordinary morning. I took a deep breath, resting my hands on the counter, and said calmly, "You know, Andrew, I've spent the morning going through some of the documents in the house, and I noticed some strange things." He said nothing more. I just let the phrase float in the air, loaded with meanings. For a moment, I noticed something. His posture, always so firm and collected, faltered for a microsecond. The corner of his mouth trembled, his eyes averted. Minute details that anyone could ignore, but not someone who observes with decades of attention. Andrew quickly resumed his smile, trying to fill the silence with light words. "Strange things. Maybe I confused you with administrative details, Dad. You know how it is. Sometimes the paperwork is confusing." But I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I was silent, with my arms crossed, my gaze fixed. The weight of my presence and my silence was enough to create a discomfort that no smile could disguise. He continued, a little more accelerated, trying to manipulate the situation. "Maybe you're tired. These last few weeks have been intense. Maybe it's just age confusion." I kept calm. I didn't get into the game. I didn't give him space to try to convince me. I just watched every move, every gesture, every attempt to mask the truth. His every word was a clue, and I mentally catalogued them. The tension in the air grew slowly, almost tangible. I could feel that Andrew was being forced to accelerate his plan, to expose himself more, because he realized that I was aware of everything. And that's exactly what I wanted. Not to confront directly, not to accuse, but to create an environment where he would begin to reveal his true character on his own. As he tried to regain his composure, my thoughts flew to Martha's diary, to what Edward and Sarah had shown me about Andrew's pattern, to every detail that indicated that he was not only an opportunist, but a systematic predator. And at that moment, I realized that, even without raising my voice, without making accusations, I had control of the situation. Every microgesture, every hesitation, every rehearsed sentence of his was now evidence. I could turn that seemingly casual interaction into concrete proof of intent if I remained patient and attentive. And as I watched Andrew, I felt a strange mixture of frustration and determination. Frustration that I had been deceived, but determination that I could finally use my experience and intelligence to turn the tide. And here's something I want you to keep. The quiet strength of those who patiently watch can be more powerful than any direct confrontation. Can you see how silence, well used, can make the villain reveal himself? Now, the next installment will show how every step Andrew takes under this silent pressure begins to build the perfect trap, and the question that looms is, will he realize he's being watched, or will it be too late to escape the plan itself? I took a deep breath and got up from the armchair, feeling every muscle tense but decisive. Andrew was in the room, trying to keep that smile that always hid intentions, but I knew that that smile was starting to tremble inside. "Andrew," I began calmly, "I have decided that I will do a thorough review of all the documents in the house, the bills, everything, and I'll do it in the presence of Edward and Detective Sarah." There was no question, there was no discussion, there was no loophole, just a firm and clear statement. His face changed for a moment. His professional mask wobbled, and I saw in his eyes that glimmer of suppressed despair, the realization that the controller was slipping out of his hands. "In addition," I continued, "I will change all passwords, restrict access, and any future action will be recorded." Andrew opened his mouth to speak, but I continued, "No justifications, no explanations." A clean, surgical cut that made it clear that the dominion he believed he had over my home and my life was now an illusion. He stepped forward, hesitated, and I realized that Edward and Sarah were right. The rush was beginning to take over the predator. Every little gesture of his indicated that he was trying to regain the upper hand. but the situation was in my hands, and he didn't know exactly what I had prepared. I felt a strange, almost liberating calm as I saw that the plan we had built was working, not by confrontation, but by calculated distancing. Andrew was being led into the very trap he helped set with his own mistakes and arrogance. And now, as he moved restlessly, the question hovering in my mind was clear. How far would he go to try to maintain control before exposing himself completely? The next step would define how quickly his entire scheme would fall apart, and I knew that every detail he believed he had hidden would be used against him. What he does not realize is that from this moment on, his every move will be observed and recorded, and every attempt at manipulation will only bring him closer to his own fall. And that's exactly what you'll discover in the next part. How patience and strategy turn the villain's fear into your biggest mistake. I immediately realized that Andrew felt the weight of my silence and my firm stance. He began to act faster, more nervous, trying to regain the control that had already slipped out of his hands. Lindsay was next to me in the living room, and I could see the concern in her eyes, that mixture of love for her husband and doubt about the situation that was unfolding in front of her. Andrew began to insinuate, almost subtly, that I wasn't well, that maybe I was forgetting things, that some domestic accident might happen. His words were calculated, like sharp blades disguised as care. He was trying to paint my own home, our refuge, my legacy, the place where I lived for so many years with Martha, as an unsafe, crumbling place, a problem that needed to be controlled by others. Lindsay began to falter, and for a moment I felt a pang of sadness and indignation. She didn't understand Andrew's true nature, but she felt that something was wrong, and this confusion was exactly what he expected. I kept calm, breathing slowly, noticing his every micro-gesture, every pause, every attempt at manipulation. My mind catalogued everything. His every sentence was an attempt to make it seem like I was the problem, that my daughter should trust him more than me. But the old man, who has spent decades solving complex problems, did not fall into the trap. I was silent, just watching, allowing his haste and anxiety to become visible, revealing his despair. And as he spoke, an idea occurred to me. Everything he did, every word, every attempt to manipulate Lindsay was now turning into evidence if I knew how to record it carefully. I held my posture tight, my gaze fixed, breathing slowly, and thought that was exactly what Edward and Sarah had planned from the beginning, to let Andrew expose himself, speed up his actions, and record his every step. And you know there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. I could see the desperation growing, the tension rising by the minute, and I realized that the villain, who had always believed he had control, was now about to lose his line entirely. The question that was hanging in the air, and that you will discover in the next part, is, to what extent will he risk trying to maintain his charade, and what will be the next mistake that will lead him to the trap that we have carefully already built? Andrew returned that afternoon with an expression that mixed impatience and arrogance, carrying the forged documents and the same complicit notary, now more aggressive, more hurried, as if every minute lost was a risk to him. I walked into the living room, keeping the calm that had already become my most powerful weapon. He began with the same rehearsed tone, insisting that the transfer was already complete and that I had obviously just forgotten to sign what was due. I remained silent for a few seconds, observing each gesture, each micro-expression. The camera discreetly installed by Detective Sarah captured everything. The calculating look, Andrew's effort to control the tone of voice, his hands shaking slightly as he handled the papers. I took a slow breath, leaning on the counter, and said simply, "Explain further, Andrew. It seems like there are details that I didn't really understand." He gulped, visibly uncomfortable, and began detailing every step of the alleged deal, every clause, every planned transfer, not realizing that he was incriminating himself in front of legal recordings and hidden authorities. With each sentence, my heart beat faster, but the posture remained serene. He knew that the villain had no idea that his own arrogance was becoming the most solid evidence against him. And at that moment, a sentence escaped me almost like a whisper. It's amazing how truth is revealed when patience and observation go together. Andrew, trying to keep his composure, kept detailing the handling of the signatures, the collaboration of the notary, the methods of pressure to force me to agree. His every word, every repeated gesture was a piece of the puzzle I needed, so that Edward and Sarah could close the case accurately. I remained calm, silent, letting the discomfort grow in the air. He believed I was confused, but in fact his every move was being recorded, catalogued, and turned into irrefutable evidence. And now, my friend, what you need to know is that whatever he thought was the final blow, it was about to become the very end of his scheme. The next moment will show how a criminal's overconfidence can become the proof that convicts him. And the question that hangs in the air is, will Andrew realize before the time he was captured, or will his own greed be his last move? Andrew continued to try to pressure me, holding the forged documents as if he could intimidate someone he had already seen and planned too much to be fooled. He spoke quickly, hurriedly, repeating that everything was already signed, that I had forgotten, that it was just a formality. And then suddenly the door opened firmly, and Detective Sarah's team entered in a coordinated fashion, every step calculated, every look determined. The fake notary froze in the middle of the movement, as if he had turned into a stone statue. Andrew, in turn, turned pale, and for a moment, that man who had always seemed so sure and smiling didn't know where to look. Lindsay had been behind him, called to the scene minutes earlier, and her face collapsed as she realized the truth. The man she had chosen as her husband, whom she trusted, was trying to steal not only our home, but her very name and integrity. She took a step back, and tears began to flow, mingling with the pent-up anger that now arose in me, a silent, firm anger of one who sees justice finally manifest. Andrew tried to articulate words, improvise justifications, attempts to manipulate, to reverse the situation, but it was too late. His every gesture, every move, every sentence was already recorded, documented, captured by the legal cameras Sarah had installed, every piece of evidence ready to expose his detailed and criminal plan. He retreated, not knowing how to react, trying to find some way out that didn't exist. The notary, realizing that everything was falling apart, raised his hands, surrendering to the irrefutable evidence of his involvement. And there, at that moment, the feeling of justice was so intense that I felt a weight leave my chest, the silent victory of those who plan, observe, and do not allow themselves to be deceived. Lindsay ran to me, hugging me tightly, and in that hug I felt not only her gratitude, but redemption from all the months of fear and uncertainty we had been through. Andrew was restrained, immobilized, and I remained silent, watching every move, knowing that the law would finally take its course. But the question that now imposes itself, and which will be revealed in the next part, is how will formal justice consolidate this victory, and what will remain for Andrew and his accomplice to face in the next chapters of their lives? The backyard air was fresh that morning, and I walked slowly among the trees I had planted with my bare hands, smelling the earth and the gentle warmth of the Naperville sun. Every flower bed, every stake, every mark on the grass reminded me of Martha, of our life together, and of everything we built there, brick by brick, decision by decision. The house was silent, finally safe, and at the same time seemed more alive than ever because there were no more shadows of manipulation hanging over it. I reflect on how trust can be so fragile, how the goodness of a heart can be misinterpreted as weakness, and how it takes courage to maintain dignity even in the face of betrayals that seem to crush everything around you. I sit on the bench in the backyard, watching the leaves sway in the wind, and think about how patience and observation have become my greatest weapons. Lindsay approaches slowly, hesitantly, tears streaming down her face, and finally hugs me, asking forgiveness for the naivety and lack of perception in the face of what Andrew tried to do. I wrap my arms around her with firm arms, feeling the truth of those words, but maintaining the serenity that has accompanied me throughout this battle. I didn't lose my home, I say softly. I got my voice back. The sense of justice, of restored control, comes not from violent revenge, but from the confirmation that I have remained whole, that my experience and my patience have triumphed over the malice of another. Every tree, every bookshelf, every hallway is now a testament to resilience and strategy, a reminder that even in loneliness and pain, we can maintain our essence and protect those we love. And as I watch Lindsay pull herself together, smiling with a mixture of relief and gratitude, I realize that the real victory lies not just in Andrew's imprisonment, but in restoring balance, in the awareness that kindness can coexist firmly, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in remaining calm, attentive, and whole. But still, even with peace restored, one question remains. How do we use these lessons to move forward, to protect not only our home, but our own history and the people we love? And it is this reflection that makes room for the final chapter of this story, where every choice made, every gesture planned, and every moment of patience becomes a legacy and learning for a lifetime. Time passed slowly but surely, and I finally felt that all the weight of the last few months was dissipating. Andrew served his sentence, the accomplice notary received the punishment he deserved, and Lindsay, my daughter, rebuilt her life with a strength that filled me with pride. The house, which held every memory of Martha, every laugh, every tear, remained intact, like a silent sanctuary of the life we had built together. I strolled through the halls, taking in the little details, the polished wood of the bookshelves, the smell of varnish mixed with flowers from the backyard, and I felt a peace that hadn't visited me in a long time. I quietly began lecturing at libraries and community centers in Illinois, sharing experiences, warning about fraud and financial abuse affecting the elderly, without seeking fame, just wanting to prevent others from going through the same fear and anguish we feel. It was in this process that I realized a universal lesson. Kindness and patience are not weakness. They can be powerful weapons when accompanied by attention, courage, and strategy. I learned that protecting those we love and ourselves requires observation, knowledge, and above all, quiet steadfastness. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for accompanying me here, for listening to this story with patience and sensitivity. Each like is like a hug that warms and supports this channel. Each subscription is an invitation to come back for the next coffee with me to share more stories and learnings. Comment from which city you are watching. I want to feel that we are together in this community of experiences and memories. Activate the bell so that you don't miss it when the coffee is brewed again and we can continue this conversation. And don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story, and get ready to discover how, once again, patience, strategy, and quiet courage can turn pain into victory and preserve what really matters in life. I was silenced by the pain, but I spoke when it was necessary. And sometimes that's enough to save everything that really matters.